It is 8:30, Wednesday, October the 3rd, 2018, and welcome to the fall quarter introduction to corrections for the next 11 weeks. I'm going to be with you to provide with you details about how to be successful in this course, how to earn the best possible grade. And so I'm going to, in this open house today, provide you with my expectations, and then I'm going to give you the requirements for the course project, which is something that I always take the time the first week to do. So it's going to be a longer session than our normal sessions that we'll have starting next week and then going on from there. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share with you my page. Okay. You can see that's me right there. You can see my information here. My phone number is listed here. And then pay attention to this statement. It means what it says, and I'll read it out to you because I won't read it out anymore after today. Students can feel free to call me, text me, or email me any hour of the day except the 25th hour of the day. Now, I want to say to you that I'm very open in terms of helping students. I spend a lot of time sharing with you information when you run into a problem. But I do say to you that don't worry about when you do it, just do it. If it's an urgent matter, I would recommend that you not email me. I would recommend that you try to call me. If you don't get me, leave me a message or text me. You will find that I respond very quickly to both of those modes. And if this is a situation that you're having a problem, if you send an email, it might be a delay in me responding to you. But the text and the phone call, I respond to very quickly because it shows up right here on this phone, right here. And I respond very fast. If you text me, make sure you include your name, the course, and so then describe what the issue is. But your name and the course, because when you text me, it's going to show a phone number, and sometimes, well, I don't know your phone numbers, but the point of the matter is that then I'll know what your issue is concerning if you're asking a particular question. So it's very important. Sometimes students run into situations where they email me, and I'll say if it was me in this position, it was an emergency situation or an exigent situation, I would pick up the phone. Some professors don't allow that, but I do. I'm very flexible about it. And then the next thing, it says APA and critical thinking are very important in the grading of all assignments. APA is more elaborated on down here at the bottom through some resources, but I reduce it to the point here. It says, okay, first let's go ahead to additional information. Critical thinking is also very important. That you will find when you use Grammarly. Run all your papers through Grammarly to make sure that you check the plagiarism box. You have a free Grammarly account. You don't have to pay for a Grammarly account. If you go to the resources tab, then you can find your Grammarly information. Use Grammarly. Run all of your papers through it. And when you submit your papers, submit them double space, not single space, and make sure that your papers don't have the Grammarly notations on the side. You should be able to copy and paste that onto your final document that you're going to submit to me. Now, I remind you that you must conduct research. That means that all resources should be used to prepare your written assignments. Do not rely on the textbook. The textbook is not research. It is a tool that has been researched by the authors. And I want you to get into the habit of researching, as it is a requirement in this course. You'll see it under each section, that research, and I'll point it out to you when I see it. You will lose 2 points right off the bat, other than what's in the rubric, for not conducting research. Just citing the textbook alone and using it, not adequate. All written assignments should be in APA format. That means citations in the body of the paper and references at the end. You should also make sure that you have a cover sheet. You will lose 1 point for not providing a cover sheet for all written assignments. So it's very important. A lot of times students lose points because they fail to provide the APA requirements. If you provide citations and no references, or references and no citations, you're automatically going to lose 5 points. You will see that time and time again. Many students have done that. But it's important enough to be able to do that. Why are we saying this? Citations provide information to support your statements in the paper. Your statements in your papers don't just come out of the blue. They don't come from knowledge that you have. They come from your research, your studying, and you want to give credit for those sources as well. And then you want to analyze those things, critical thinking, state your position, or either challenge them, one or the other. The key thing is that you're going to provide support from noted resources. Wikipedia is not one of them. You will see that in the rubric. That will cause you to lose points very easily. Okay? So you want to have credible resources. So in this area here, the course homepage, I provide an abundance of information to help you. You can take time to click on those. Tutoring. If you need tutoring and I see that you're not doing well, I will refer you for tutoring. Also, you should be aware that tutoring is not just for struggling students. It's for students who want to better themselves. And you should develop the mindset to want to better yourself. I have provided information about tutoring and where you can get that as well. Articles that I have going beyond the textbook, which I've already discussed. Analytical tips for criminal justice. That's when we start getting into critical thinking. Information literacy, importance of it, which we're going to talk about as one of the transferable skills. Referencing for criminal justice students, again, dealing with APA. Then you don't have to worry about the annotated bibliography in this course. There's a video that is available if you copy and paste it under critical thinking, and it explains to you in detail. It's not a very long video, to help you understand what we mean by critical thinking. Finally, in this section, rubrics are located in each weekly written assignment and the course projects. You will see in the rubric what is expected of you for that assignment. You will also see a section that says, it'll say either comments or information from me that will tell you what you did wrong or what you did right. But the key thing is to look for the things that you did wrong and read my notes. Don't just look at the rubric, but look at the comments under there. Sometimes students say, I saw the rubric, but I didn't see. I said, look at the comments under there. If you don't see comments, that means that you satisfied all the requirements of that section. And I let you know that right away. The common error is not providing citations or references in the APA. Another common area is not satisfying the page requirement, 1 or 2 pages or whatever it is. The other common error that students make is not providing citations throughout the body of the paper. If you do a 2-page paper and you don't provide citations throughout the body of the paper, you're going to lose some points, because the idea of citations is to support your statements. And that means to me that you are taking information, but you're not giving credit for it. So you're going to lose points for that as well. So I feel sometimes when I read papers that students say, oh, I need to put a citation in the body and a reference at the end, and they'll pour in 1 for 2 pages. Or they'll put in 1 for 1 page, and that's it. Or they'll mention at the end, or either they'll throw it in at the beginning. Not going to do it. The context of the paper should flow with you and your position, with support going along with it. That's the key to good writing, okay? And then your discussion post. Every discussion post should be detailed. It should not be a one-liner. Shouldn't be very brief statements. It should be on a timely basis. Discussion posts are due Tuesday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and reply posts Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, with the exception of week 11, which I'm not going to talk about. When we get there, we'll deal with that. But get into your mind that those discussion posts, and the rubric breaks that down. I take away points when when your discussion posts are late. If your discussion posts are submitted after the discussion forum is over, you will see me say something like, very nice posts, however, they were submitted after the discussion forum ended. Now, when does the discussion forum end? It ends on Saturday night, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. But pay attention to this. If you have provided an initial post within the period from that Tuesday that it was due or before, and then your reply post is submitted that Sunday, which is after the period, I will give you credit for that reply post, but I will take a point away. But my point being is that if you submit an initial post and a reply post that Sunday, no deal, no deal. Because the idea of discussions is to submit your post, your initial post especially, in time for students to be able to reply or respond to it. I do encourage responding to more than one discussion post because it makes the discussion forum more interesting, and you don't get additional points, but it's a good practice for you because it connects you to your classmates. And when we start talking about teamwork as a transferable skill, this is actually an opportunity for you to exercise teamwork with your students, your fellow classmates, because of the fact that they're all across the United States. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind with discussion posts. Your live classroom sessions, obviously, this is the link. Open house taking place right now until 10. Normally it'll be 8:30 to 9:30. But because of some lengthy information, including taking details, taking a lot of time on the course project right off the front, this recording will be a valuable recording to help you. If you forget anything about the project, go back and listen to this lecture. You don't have to listen to the whole thing if you're just trying to find information about the project when you refresh your mind. The live lectures will take place every other Wednesday, beginning next Wednesday, the 10th. Weeks 2, even weeks 4, 6, 8, and 10 will be your last one. Where it says recordings, I will convert the recordings to MP4s and submit a link under here that tells you the link, which is a YouTube link, so that you can easily access the lecture. Now, it takes me a little time to do that. I usually get it within the next day or so. Such as example, tonight, this lecture will probably be converted by late tonight, and you'll have access to it early tomorrow or late tonight. The point of the matter is that you'll be able to see it. Some students have said that they would rather, they said it takes a long time to get the recording. You don't get the recording right after anyway, even if I used WebEx, because it takes time for it to be generated and reach the point where I can even share it with you. So the point of the matter is that there are issues a lot of times that students have with WebEx that they don't have with YouTube, because people go to YouTube all the time. And so you go to YouTube, or you click on the link, and it leads you right to the YouTube lecture. And you're able to hear clearly. Some of the writing is a little smaller. However, the bottom line is that you are able to know what the module is, because of the fact that you should be familiar with the module anyway that I go over with you. Okay? So that's how the lectures are going to work. Now, we get over here, and the writing process, there's something to assist you here. Assist you with APA. If you open this up more and click down here, it tells you about a guide that helps you with APA. So if you don't understand APA, go to this guide. There's a video there that helps you understand and explains to you. And if it comes down to it, tutors, our student tutors, are students who have been trained in how to deal with APA and how to give you assistance. So don't lose points because of APA. And then the link included in this announcement is to a PDF document that you should download. Okay, this is a one-sheet document which you can click on the PDF, and you'll see that this is a helpful resource for you to help you. Now, let's look at the welcome announcement. This should be the first announcement before we get to the week one. Let's look at that. And this too reminds you about the open house that's taking place right now. But let's look at this. It tells you the name of the course. It tells you who I am in the first paragraph. And then all of these highlighted expectations, if you develop the habit of checking them, announcements. There are announcements every week, at least one. The first announcement usually will give you the details of the assignments, what's taking place that week, when they're due as well. The student lounge, this is something that you do week one, and I've submitted myself a detailed student lounge introduction telling you about myself as well. And then your course mail. I sent you a welcome email. Check your course mail frequently and make sure, because that's where we communicate a lot. Your syllabus, I'm going to go over that in a few minutes to discuss issues that are important, like late assignment policies and other issues. The calendar is a place where you can find for the whole quarter when things are due. And sometimes students say to me, I can't find my calendar. It's very easy. There's a link at the top. There's a link at the top that says calendar, right next to, yeah, you see calendar. Then there's, and that's how you can find your calendar. So anyway, you want to utilize your calendar. General course questions, that's if you have a question about an issue that everybody can answer or anybody could answer, including myself, but don't put your personal business out there. You send that to me in the form of an email or a text. The resources tab, where you can find information about Grammarly and other resources that I also have listed on the course homepage as well. And then there's other information to help you. And then finally at the bottom here, it tells you about the live lecture and explains the schedule. Now, one of the things I want to tell you, if you have a technical issue, please contact PSC, Personal Support. They are available 24/7, and then this is their phone number. Now, you will see that at the bottom of every page, see it right there, right here at the bottom, Personal Support, and their phone number right there in front of you. And you can always reach them 24/7 about a technical issue. I have students that sometimes send me a message about technical issues, and I refer them back and says you should have contacted PSC right away. And that includes your book and things like that. All right, so now let's look at our announcement for this week. You will notice that my announcements pretty much follow the same format. It tells you the topic for the module, and this week is Correctional System and History. And it tells you your reading assignment, Chapter 1, and complete the activities and introduction to the correction system. I've got to send you the PowerPoints, which I don't know if I've sent them to you or not, but I will send them to you if I haven't after this session here. And then you'll use those PowerPoints to help you study. So then there's some activities that are in the module: an introduction to correction systems and a historical perspective. Normally I will discuss these in detail, but not today because this is an open house. But I will just touch on it and then keep moving. Your discussion post, I already talked about that. Title is given, justification for punishment, and I already told you about the due dates and all of that and time. And your written assignment, elements of the correctional system. I will go over that in just a few minutes. And then there is a timed quiz. And then every Sunday, these written assignments are due. You'll see that on the calendar. You will be completing a course project, and I will review the introduction. That's what I said earlier. These are all due by Sunday. The introduction is not an assignment this week. Your first assignment for your course project will be in week 2, and you will see that coming up when I go into the details about the course project. And I will stay in that section until I finish that. Reminder about the open house. And then I admonish you to start strong and finish strong, and give you my motto: adversity is the springboard to success. I'm going to share what that means at the very end after I finish with the course project. I want you to pay attention to that, and you'll understand why I take the position that I do. So now let's look at the course calendar. Here we go. Okay, and this tells you what the assignments are. Okay, if you click on this, it elaborates on it, and it explains to you the things that you should do. Okay, this is section 1 and 2. I thought it was only section 1, but I'm going to check because they did make a change. If it is 1 and 2, then you make sure that you read them both. Your initial post, justification for punishment. I already talked about that. Your open house, your reply posts, your written assignment, your quiz, and then the course project introduction, which I'm going to be talking about in just a minute. Okay? So that's your course calendar, and every week you can go all the way down and you can see everything. This is for October, and then we have November after that, and then December when the course ends. So that's your course calendar. Let's take and get familiar with that. So now let's look at Module 1. Then I'll be able to check in a few minutes about what I told you about the reading part. But I'm pretty sure it was just one. Okay. This is your written assignment. Now, and it tells you what you're supposed to do. Now, when you do it, there is a rubric. When you open it up, it tells you the due date, which is this Sunday the 7th, and then you click on view, you can see the rubric. And the rubric explains to you what you have to do. And it tells you concerning the 4 components of corrections, which is only 4 components, only 4: probation, parole, jail, and prison. Students provide details as to how each component fits into the system. So you'll get 15 points if you do that correctly with citations and references. It's a 2-page minimum requirement, not counting the cover page. Remember, I already talked about that. And then citations and references, no Wikipedia or generic sources. That is how you obtain your 25 points. And I will, under each section in your grade book, include information explaining what you did right here or what you did wrong. And you'll know why you lost your points. So you want to make sure that you look at that rubric, okay? So it tells you what the assignment is, all right? Now, let's go back. The other assignment is your discussion post, which I've already elaborated on. And then you have a quiz. It is a timed quiz, 10 multiple choice questions, okay? And it's set for 10 minutes. I recommend when you take the quizzes that you take the quizzes after you've finished all the material and gone over it. Again, I'm going to submit to you the PowerPoints that will help you. I will not be using them in the lecture, but they're for your benefit. So now let's go to the lesson section. Under lesson content, where we provide you with the objectives. I'm not saying under lesson content for no reason, and you'll understand in a few minutes. Again, it is just section 1. It's not section 1 and 2. So you read section 1 or chapter 1, and then the criminal justice system. Then we're going to talk about the course project, okay? So here's the introduction to correctional system. Now, you should be aware from the very beginning that the corrections, remember the course that you're in, it's introduction to corrections, not law enforcement, not courts, but corrections. Corrections is when you've done something wrong. Either you've pled guilty or you've been found guilty. People who are found not guilty do not have any dealings with the correction system. They don't have any reason to be corrected. So it is to protect the public and provide, some people say punishment, but there are different theories and concepts of punishment, treatment, and rehabilitation. And so you have probation officers who deal with individuals who are on probation. You're going to discover from your reading what parole officers do, what probation officers do, what jailers do, and what prison correction officers do. And you're going to discover issues like the prisons are overcrowded, as you already know that before you even start this course, and that there's some issues about incarceration that we won't talk a whole lot about, that's privatizing prisons. But the bottom line is that there's some issues as far as budgetary restraints that create problems with the shortage of individuals working in those facilities. And so this is a little introduction to that. But you'll get your details from your PowerPoint and from your book. Now, let me run this for you. You should be able to just do that if you don't see it. And it gives you the history of corrections, starting all the way back with the Code of Hammurabi, which we had all over the law school when I went there, and dealing with restitution. And then you click on the next area, and you can go on and on. So as you click on it, it provides the information up there. So I'm not going to spend time, and it goes all the way there to where we are today with prisons and so forth. So I'm not going to cover that today because I want to spend time on the next part. Okay? So now, let's talk about, okay, first of all, your written assignment is actually this week a clue to the areas that fit in corrections. And I say this always from the beginning. It says in your course project overview, and I'm going to give you the breakdown of it. It's really only 2, 4, 7, and 9. It's 4 weeks that this project consists of. 4 weeks, that's it. But you got to do things before that, those 4 weeks come. You'll see what I'm talking about. So here's the deal. The first thing that you need to be aware of, and do not forget this, and it's written right here in the project overview in the first line, you will select one of 4 components. And these are the only 4 that are acceptable. You will get a 0 if you don't use one of these 4. Probation. So what is probation? Probation is when an individual is not sent to jail, but is allowed to return to the community and be able to serve their time outside of jail. And notice I said outside of jail. I said outside of jail. Jail. Now, you will understand why I said that in a little bit. So probation generally fits in non-violent or either not very serious offenses. A lot of them are misdemeanors. But even if they're felonies, they're generally non-violent offenses. So probation means you're under supervision of the court. You have a probation officer. You report to that probation officer. That probation officer assists you as a counselor to help you to get your life back on track. Parole is when an individual has been incarcerated in prison or served time in jail, but oftentimes it's prison. And that individual has served some time, and they have more time to go. And they are what we issue what we call an early release and are allowed to live out the rest of their time outside of jail or prison on the conditions that are elaborated on by the parole board, and those individuals deal with those. I will discuss that in more detail when we get to the modules where we talk about parole and probation. But needless to say, so you understand a general idea. Jail. Jail is a short term or a place where individuals are incarcerated for short periods of time. Oftentimes, they are misdemeanors or not very violent offenses. Now, or it is a place where individuals are sent while they're awaiting trial. They haven't been to trial yet, but they could not make bail, or bail wasn't given, and they are housed in jail, which is a short-term situation. That can be more than 1 year, but the point of the matter is it is not a permanent setup. It's there generally for short-term individuals who receive lighter sentences, or they're still awaiting trial. That's jail. And the final one is prison. Prison is where you go for long terms, and you generally go there over a year, and you serve time behind bars. Now, they are classified by maximum, minimum, and all those things. We'll talk about those a little later. But prison is where you connect with not a parole officer, but a probation officer. That's when you have served some time in prison and you are released and serve the rest of your time outside of jail. So, just to make it clear, your paper has to be on probation. You can do juvenile or you can do adult probation. But don't try to do them both because they operate a little differently. Parole, which I've explained, jail, or prison. Okay? Don't do jail and prison. So you got one of the four, and only these four. Don't come to me with, as some students have come back, they always want to do a ride-along, or they want to do a law enforcement. I said law enforcement has nothing to do with corrections, because law enforcement is before corrections. Corrections is after adjudication, after a finding of guilty, whether it's a plea or a judge or a jury found you guilty. Then you're subjected to the correctional system, and you can receive probation, you can have parole, jail, or prison. All of those play into that. Those are the only four. So once you've determined which one of the four that you're going to do your project on, you set up an in-person interview with the individual that you want to work with, whether they're in probation, parole, jail, or prison. Now, you can ask if you can tour the facility or agency, but sometimes due to, as it says, due to security and data issues, some agencies won't allow more than an interview. Now, let me say this to you up from the beginning, because I know somebody's going to contact me and ask me. It says here an in-person interview is optimal, but I will accept a telephone interview. It says with prior instructor approval. I'm giving you this approval this October 3rd in this week 1. So you don't have to send me a message. Professor, is it possible that they won't let me do? Yes, you can do a telephone interview with someone working in the agency. Now, you'll have some assigned interview questions for the interview, which is due week 7. We're going to talk about that. And there are also some other interests that you'll have in terms of questions. In addition to the interview, you're going to conduct research into the background of your agency. Usually you can get that from their website and other places. Possible solutions to the challenges identified in your interview. All right. So now, in the interview, you will be operating on the basis of, oh, and you know, because I didn't do the syllabus, but don't worry about the syllabus. I'm going to actually cover the syllabus very briefly after I finish this because I skipped it. We're going to deal with transferable skills. Communication. You're going to be demonstrating communication in your written, reading, and oral communication with the individuals. Okay? You'll need to maintain a professional manner. Go dressed professionally. And you're going to deal with grammar, punctuation, and spelling in your final interview reports. And there are many, many, many resources available to you to help you with this process. The resources tab of the class tells you about that. There's a library and learning center where you'll find that. That deals with communication. Diversity and teamwork. You'll develop a better understanding working with people from various backgrounds and perspectives. So you're going to deal with that with your interview and your visit, whichever way you do it. So now, what are the due dates? Notice number 1 is not shaded in. That's because of what I'm doing now. It is not an assignment. But what it is I'm assigning you to get an understanding about what you have to do in the week 2, 4, 7, and 9. Remember I said it was only 4 weeks. So in week 2, which is next week, but you shouldn't wait until next week. So select an agency and contact person. And you want to start doing that early. Make that your business. And when you do that, reach out to someone. Reach out to an agency and get a contact person. Work on it right away. I cannot tell you, there are delays sometimes. Sometimes the agency works, but they'll change the contact person on you. That's okay. But I want to know for week 2 what agency you're going to use of one of the 4. And I want to know specifics. The name of the agency, Illinois Department of Corrections, or Cook County Jail, or the Cook County Probation Department, or the Parole Department of the state of Illinois, those kind of things. The counties don't usually have parole. So that's due for week 2. Week 4, agency overview and background. That's when you're going to provide research and information about your agency. I've already elaborated on that. Week 7 is your interview report. Now, I will say this from the very beginning. Your interview should have citations in the body. Your interview report, what are citations? The person you're interviewing. Say who it is in citations. You do not have to have references for this part. The agency overview and background, use citations and references. But the exception, and you'll see that when we get to week 7. You'll see that in the rubric. And then week 9, it will tell you the requirements that you have to have, which actually, here's the deal. You include all the information that you gathered from the first 3 weeks into your final, along with whatever else is in that module. That's the formula for doing this. So here are the requirements here. Interview questions. These 5 questions should be asked and given answers in detail. Now, here's the deal. Don't bunch them together. You can don't give me a list, but you can even do it by putting a section for number 1. What are the minimum requirements required to be hired in your position? And then underline that or have that highlighted, and then elaborate on that in your answer in each section there. Okay? 2, same thing. 3. Now, in addition to these, there should be a minimum of 3 questions of your choice. So there should be a minimum of 8 questions, all categorized and broken down. A lot of students, what they've done is when they've done their interview, they've categorized it. So when they put their final paper together, they separate it in their paper. And it's like chapter 1, or just like chapter 1, chapter 2, and so forth. I'm just giving you ideas. Based on the agency selected, the following background information and some of the common issues involve these items here. These should be included in there. You'll see when you get to week 4 what those specifics are depending on what agency that you selected, what kind you selected. So now we deal with the ethics and professional responsibility. As a professional, you're expected to understand and apply ethical professional principles. These are things that are really important for you. We teach as transferable skills, and this is going to be important wherever you're employed. So as part of your review of the agency you choose to research, include the mission statement. There is a mission statement. It's either on the website or you can ask someone, and the functions of that particular entity, okay? They have a code of conduct sometimes and things like that. Digital fluency. As you research, you'll need to access at least one website. Remember I told you that provides you general information about the agency. The importance of digital fluency is the skill to be able to find information, basically. And to continue with these skills, you're asked to provide a minimum of 3 resources. 3 resources: a book, a journal article, and a website, in addition to your interview. Okay? So that's what you're going to do when you get into the research of selected agency. APA, in-text citations, and reference. Okay? Information literacy. Remember I talked about this. Reliable resources. Wikipedia, I already said, is not a credible resource. And as you complete your research, you critically evaluate your sources for possible biases. Make sure that you don't, most of the time in these kind of papers, you don't run across that too much. All right. Each assignment is graded independently. Week 2, you get 1 grade. Week 4, you get another grade. Week 7, you get another grade, and then you get your final grade in week 9. And I will provide specific grading criteria for each step. That's the rubric. And you have that with each of the assignments. If you have questions, ask me. Ask me. Or post ideas in the general course questions. Okay? Very important. So that's the project. So I've given you the requirements. I've given you everything that you need to know. You can look at the modules themselves for more details for what week 2 says, week 4, week 7, week 9. But here's the way you look at it. You're building a building. You're starting out with the basement. Then you're coming to the first floor. Then the second floor. And then you're putting the roof over the building in your final week, week 9. Very important, very important. And these are where you find the information. I guarantee you there will be somebody who will come back to me and says, I don't know where to find the questions. I just told you where the questions are. They're right here. They're right here. And how many there need to be is right there as well. So that's the course project. Okay? And then this is a little part about tutoring. So now let me go back. So that's the course project. So let me go back and just quickly peruse the syllabus, which is very important for you to understand that So the syllabus gives you my name, my phone number, my email. It gives you some information that I've already shared with you, my notes. It tells you what the textbook is. It tells you all the requirements. We've already discussed discussion posts. The course consists of readings, discussions, which is discussion posts, written assignments, the quizzes. There will be 5, 10 multiple choice questions that are timed, and the course project. You select one of 4 areas of corrections. I already told you what those 4. And interview a staff member of an agency of your choice and provide all the details that I gave you. And then your final exam. This will be in week 11. 50 multiple choice questions, and it's comprehensive. When I say comprehensive, you should begin to prepare during the beginning of this course. An outline using the PowerPoints are very valuable to help you prepare for the final exam. Now, I read discussions, 220 points, 10 points for initial posts, 10 points for reply posts, written assignments, 305 points. You already saw we'll see the requirements for each written assignment. The course project, 165 points. I already went over that. The quizzes, 10 points for each of 5 quizzes, and your final exam, 40 points for the 50 multiple choice questions. But you get 40 points for that. Now, I want to say from the outset, do not call me and ask me how to get a C in my course. I will not answer that. My job is to get you to A and B, but A is my optimal. If you follow the things that I share with you in these lectures, you will end up with an A. I guarantee you. If you run into problems, I've seen students run into major problems, and they've still got A's. The point of the matter is don't wait, until weeks and weeks and weeks down the road to want to try to catch up. That doesn't work like that. It's not going to work very well for you. So this is where I want you to end up with, all right? And then the transferable skills, we've already talked about those. But these are skills that we've identified that will help you in transferring from school into public life. I've already covered those, so I won't go over those in detail. I will talk about the late assignment policy. If assignments are submitted late, you lose 10% of your grade for each day. And however, though, I have the ability to waive the late penalty in case of extenuating circumstances as determined by me. I've already said earlier that if you have an extenuating circumstance, reach out to me. Let me know what's going on. Let me know what the problem is. I'm really, really willing to help you, but I got to know what the problem is. And the best way, if you have a serious problem, is text me or call me. Sometimes people send emails, but if it's an exigent situation, it's best to do it that way. The point of the matter is I must know, because I'm not going to assume. If I don't see you letting me know a reason in a timely fashion, you're going to be losing points. And once you lose those points, like I had students sometimes come back and say, for the last couple of weeks, I've been dealing with this or that and the other, and that's why I haven't submitted it. And they were like about week 4 by this time. I said, well, why didn't you tell me at the very beginning? I said, I am so sorry. I can't do anything about those prior weeks. So, unfortunately, that person will submit their assignments and recognize this. If you're losing 10% of the grade up to a maximum of 7 days, it really doesn't matter. 10% loss for each day. By the time you get to day 3, you're down to a C. Day 4, you're D. Day 5, you're heading towards D minus or F. So my point being, it doesn't even have to get to 7 days. Then the other thing I want to point out to you, and I've already said this, about discussion posts. Discussion posts must be submitted during the week of that. I can't extend those, and I will not extend those. So it's very important that you get those completed. And then the academic integrity policy, you can take time to read it yourself. And that is what I wanted to share with you for today concerning the issues of it. Now, don't neglect paying attention to the course project that I went over and explained in detail. Don't make it harder than it has to be. I can tell you that I've taught this course probably for like 3 years, all year round. And I have had students who mess up because they don't even start from day one getting the right agencies. So that's the start, very beginning. I know what you might want to do, but you got to think about what course you're in. This is corrections, so you got to stay in the areas of corrections, and I've indicated what the 4 are: probation, parole, prison, and jail. That's it, period. Okay, no exceptions. So now I am going to, let's see, I've covered everything I want to cover. I'm going to go back, and I want to share with you something for the next few minutes, because this is supposed to go to 10, but because of the way I've done it many times, I've actually got it down to a science. I want to explain to you why the announcements at the end say adversity is a springboard to success. And for those of you who says, what announcements are you talking about? I'll go back again and share with you the course homepage and the announcement. Let's see, let's get back to the course homepage. Okay, there we go. And the announcement here. You get to the bottom of the announcement after giving all the information. Adversity is a springboard to success. Why do I say that? And why am I so rigid in terms of teaching this? And it all started back from my personal experience in life when I was 7 years old. When I was 7 years old, my whole life turned upside down and changed Memorial Day of 1957. When my dad, who took me to a baseball game to see the White Sox, we came home, and at that time I had 5 younger sisters. I was 7, and my mother and father allowed a guy to rent a room in the house that we lived in. And it was a 2-flat, and we were on the first floor, but he had his own room. Well, that day, my parents put us kids to bed. At that time, it was 1 bedroom. We had bunk beds and beds pointing in different directions. I had my own bed by myself, but the girls shared. And so anyway, a fight broke out in the house. And when the fight broke out, an individual who rented a room in the apartment, in the house, had a fight with my dad. The fight ended up in the bedroom where us kids were sleeping. Someone flicked on the lights. I would later find out it was my mother. The man took out a knife, pinned my dad in the corner, and stabbed him in the forehead. My dad bled profusely. In fact, he would die. The man ran out of the house. The police took my father's body right past my head where I was laying. His eyes were open and blood was covering his entire face. That was 61 years ago. I'm 68 years old. But I remember it like it happened yesterday because I have a photographic memory. And that cuts against you for some bad things. So anyway, I ended up finding myself in a situation where this man did not go to jail. The state did what they call nolli prosecute a case, or nolli pros, which means they did not prosecute because they didn't have sufficient evidence. Well, they weren't going to call me because I was only 7, but and my mother wasn't testifying against my about my dad, what happened with my dad, because she was in love with this guy. Because it turned out she was having an affair with him. That's what the whole fight was all about. I'd find it out years and years later. Well, needless to say, what happens, the guy ended up staying in the house with us. We buried my dad, and the guy, my mom never married him, but he ended up sleeping openly with her, and he used to beat her profusely. So I grew up in a house of domestic violence. The police were there frequently. He would beat her so bad that her face was disfigured. He stabbed her a couple of times. He beat her with a bat. And I grew up in that environment. Well, he would go to jail, and my mother would be the one that was there to get him and bring him back home. So that went on from 57 all the way until 62, when we were still living in this house on the west side of Chicago in the Lawndale area. Finally, she had one more child by him. Actually, she had 2 more, and they were girls. So thus, I had 7 sisters and me. So by 62, I was 12. So we moved out of that house into an area in Gary, Indiana, which was a nice community at that time. In fact, just a few blocks down, there were these kids that you'd see them, and they would be performing their yard. They would come to be known as the Jacksons. So it was a nice area. Well, we come to Memorial Day of 1963. My mother had a restaurant in downtown Gary, and she always left me in charge of the house because I was the oldest. So I had just turned 13 in May of 1964, and I'm sorry, 63. I had turned 13, and my mom left me in charge. We had barbecue and people over at the house. So my mother and this guy left to go to her restaurant. And so I woke up early the next morning. It was still kind of dark, but it was just before daylight. And there was smoke in the house, and I opened the door and let the smoke out. And then I saw my mother's car pull off. Well, I went and looked in her room, and her bed hadn't been slept in. But that was a common occurrence. She would be gone sometimes a day or two, and I would still be in charge of the house. Well, at any rate, on this day, we got up. I was taking care of my baby sister, and the house, everybody they ate and were watching television, and then these 2 gentlemen showed up at the door and pronounced themselves as police officers, showed their badges and said, "Can we come in?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if that's a good idea." My mother said, "We really need to talk to you." So I said, "Okay." I let them in, and they announced that my mother had been found dead in the city of Chicago, and she bled to death in a car. I immediately lost my cool and started screaming this guy's name. His name was Webster Scott. I said, "Scott, Scott, Scott." I started screaming his name. And I noticed as I was doing that my sisters were, They were crying, of course. And the baby, she was crying, but she was crying because she didn't understand what was going on, but she was crying because everybody else was crying. It was just chaos. So I had to gather myself together. Well, one of my aunts came and got us, my mother's sister, and took us to Chicago in the Chatham area to live with her while they determined what they were going to do. She didn't want us there, and she made it clear that they were working on a plan to split us up and send us different places. Some of us would even possibly enter in foster care. But we lived there a year, and it was really, really, really bad. I entered school again in Chicago, and it was just bad. And so anyway, another aunt came, and she lived in Michigan, and she came and she made it clear that she wasn't going to allow us to be split up, that she and her husband were going to have a house built for us in a not in the suburbs, but in the further south, an area called Morgan Park, actually known as Maple Park because of the new construction. And so anyway, she took us, and we moved into a newly constructed house in June or July of '64. So by this time, I was 14 years old. So when we moved in, I quickly ran into another problem with her husband, who wanted me to take his name. See, they were going to imminently adopt all the kids, but I had to give permission because I was at the age where it was required for me to give consent. So I said no, I didn't want to do that because I wanted to be the one who'd carry on my dad's name because I had nothing but sisters. So we had a real problem. He and I did not get along at all. In fact, I had some other suspicions about him that I didn't like. I couldn't say because I didn't know, which I would find out years and years later that he actually sexually abused my siblings. It was a problem. It was a bad problem, serious problem, but it was really bad. My aunt and uncle used to get into it. They would pull guns on each other. In fact, one time he actually told us to line up against the wall, and he got his gun out, but I got out of the house. And nobody got shot, but a gunshot did go off because the gun misfired. But anyway, I continued to live in that situation, and it was problematic for me. So I would stay out of the house. I had a paper route. I took a job at McDonald's. No, I didn't. I didn't go to McDonald's right away. I was 14. I was living with them, and I had problems. Well, at that time, I was 14. I would discover that the guy who killed my mom and dad was going to be sentenced because he pled guilty, and he was going to be sentenced to 10 years. But under the system that existed, 10 meant 5. And then further bad news would be given to me that 5 meant that if you behaved, that he would serve a year and a half. And that was it. 3.5 years, I'm sorry. And you have a year and a half cut off. That troubled me, and I would ask questions of people, and nobody would give me an answer. Then finally somebody said, I don't remember who it was, they said, that's just the way the legal system operates, and that's the way the law is. Well, I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I did know this much, that it was problematic. So what did I do? I went to school and I asked a librarian at my grammar school if we had any books on lawyers or attorneys. She said, we have one book. And I checked that book out of Library Guys, and I read that book from cover to cover that night. And the next day, anybody I met, I introduced myself as Richard Wright, and I said, I'm going to become a lawyer. And I decided that day. Well, as it was, I didn't get support. I was actually given an opportunity by the church after I had gone to high school to get a 4-year scholarship. But all they had to sign, but they refused to sign. I would discover something that happened maybe years later after I was a lawyer, but it goes back to when I was a 14-year-old, that somehow or another they illegally adopted me in court. I was never in court. I never would have done that. I would have told the judge, I don't want to do it. I don't care how much trouble I gave them. But anyway, somebody they took stood in my place. And I did not know until I was 34 years old, married with 3 kids, 3 girls, graduated from college, graduated from law school, that and graduated from high school, that I was actually known as Richard Collins, which means I had been illegally adopted. Well, it was a problem for me, and here's what happened. Going back to when I was 14, I met a lady that I heard on the radio, and I liked her voice, and I went and found her, and I asked her to be my mother. She said, I'll be your friend, and she mentored me and became my friend. She was involved in my life from the time I graduated from 8th grade all the way through to high school, to college, and law school. Well, anyway, when I graduated from high school, some of my friends that were members of the church that I was spending a lot of time at, I told them I wanted to get out of the house. I didn't want to stay there after high school. So they asked their mother and father, and their mother and father agreed to let me come to live with them after that, because I was 21. I was 19. But during that time, I wasn't legally an adult until 21 if I was a male. If I was an 18-year-old female, I could do it at 18. So anyway, what happened, a couple of things, is that I ended up graduating and then 69 and moved in with those people. They knew what I wanted to do with my life, and so they knew someone who worked in a law firm downtown in Chicago and managed to get me a job working in the mailroom at this big law firm. In the meantime, because my aunt and uncle wouldn't sign for me to go to college, I went ahead and started taking classes at a junior college, Loop College, which is Harold Washington College, City of Chicago. And I started taking classes there. And I didn't have a car. I was on the train. So in the meantime, I ended up in 1970 getting married to a young lady I had dated in high school. And it was actually that time that I had to have consent from my guardian, who I didn't know legally was my mother, but what she did was she brought a birth certificate that she had that still showed my last name was Wright, and I was able to get married and conceal from me the fact that the name had been changed. So anyway, here's the point. So I got married, and then here comes 2 kids. I moved out of the house from the people and then got my first apartment with her. We had mattresses. We slept on these mattresses. Got a little small baby bed. Here comes one kid, 71. The next one, 72. So here I was in school, working at the law firm as a messenger. And I used to go to work dressed up. The messengers would all come wearing polo shirts, like about what I'm wearing now. But I wore a shirt and tie. I didn't wear a jacket. So people started paying attention. And then when I got the job at the law firm, I introduced myself to all the lawyers as I got to meet them, taking their mail, taking their lunches, and told them that I was going to be a lawyer. And they paid attention to me because they saw, and they would report in the bulletin for the law firm that I was doing well in school, and all the lawyers would read that bulletin. Well, I became a file clerk in the same law firm. They promoted me. In the meantime, I ended up working in the file department, and then, about a year, something happened to the librarian, and he passed away suddenly. So they approached me to take that job. So about this time, I was leaving the junior college, heading toward a four-year institution called Roosevelt University, got accepted, majoring in political science. So I ended up working there as a law librarian. While I was working as a law librarian, my job was to be the custodian of the books. But you should know this, is that I didn't just sit there as custodian. I used to read through the material. I used to listen to the lawyers hold discussions. And what I did was I taught myself how to do legal research manually because we didn't have the systems at that time. And then I taught myself how to write memos and briefs and things like that. So one day, the lawyers were discussing a point of law, and I listened to them, and I took my lunch period when they went on lunch, and I went and pulled the cases that they were discussing the point of law. And I found them all because they were dealing with Illinois cases. And so I went to the respective books that I needed and pulled those cases, put bookmarks in them, and stacked them up. I did all this in an hour, maybe an hour and a half or so. So then I was sitting back at my desk, and the lawyers came back in, and they started asking me. He says, "We can't find any of the cases on point. There's an empty space, and they're all missing, every one of them." So I said, "They're over in that corner, stacked up," and I pointed to it. And they said, "Who did this?" I said, "I did this." They said, "What? Come with me." So they took me to one of the senior partners and said to him, "We're wasting our money on this kid. He can do legal research. He researched and found cases that are on point that we were talking about, and he overheard us, and he shared he can write memos and briefs." So the boss said, "Well, maybe we should get him an assistant and turn him into what we call a law clerk," and that's what they called it at that time. Today it's called a paralegal. And I got the job to do that. And I used to go to court with the lawyers, go to real estate closings. This was a corporate law firm, and sometimes they did criminal cases, and I would go to court with them there as well. The point of the matter is that I was on my way. Well, in the meantime, it came time for me to do two things: to take the LSAT and to choose a law school. Well, I had already made it known what law school I wanted to go to. I said I wanted to go to Northwestern University School of Law. And people said at that time, "Well, you know, that's a tough school to get into." And so I said, "Well, that's the one I want to go to." They said most people select 3 schools to fall back on in case you don't get in. So I said, "No, I'm not going to do that." I wasn't arrogant. I wasn't cocky. I was just sure of myself. So what ended up taking place is I ended up finding myself in a situation where I did take the LSAT. I didn't score the best. But what I did was I put together my application to the law school. It was about 6 pages long. But when I got the package together, giving them my story of what I just shared with you about my life experiences, giving them how I overcome obstacles, and how adversity launches me. And so my file, my package that I sent to the law school was like about this thick. It was real thick, and it was in a box. And so I had it hand delivered there. And I got a call from the law school asking if I would come. They said they don't do interviews. Now they do. They didn't do it then because I've done some interviews with students in the last year or so at the law school. But they said, "Would you be willing to come and talk to us about your application?" So I set a time, and I went. And I went and sat in a room, and I had my package. They had taken it apart. They had, I can tell, read through it. They had made copies of things, and they began to ask me questions, at least for an hour, maybe 2 hours. It was a while. And I was answering their questions without hesitation. They said, okay, it was about 4 of them, we need to adjourn for a few minutes. And it seemed like an eternity when they adjourned, but it was only about a half an hour. But when they came back to me, they said, we don't make offers verbally. They said, but we've looked at you and we like what we see. Well, what we will do is we will be sending out correspondence for the class of 1978, which will start, and this was like in May of, because I was about to graduate from college. We'll send you some correspondence that we think that you'll be happy with. Well, that was their way of telling me that I had been accepted. So I got accepted into the class of 1978. So I left the law firm to go to school. I discovered and was told that I had to quit working. My first wife at that time, who had at that time we had two kids, the two kids that were born in 71 and 72, and they were like 4 years old, 3 years old. Anyway, said that I needed to focus on my education. She was a teacher. She had graduated in 75 with a degree in education. So it was okay. So I began, my studies. But then, shortly after I began my studies, within a matter of a month or two, something happened that had not happened before in Chicago. They had a teacher strike. Therefore, we lost all of our income. And how much do you know that that put pressure on me? So it was so much pressure that I would, be just, I said, what are we going to do, what am I going to do? And then it was hard enough dealing with trying to keep up with my schoolwork. So I finally told one of my professors, Professor Joyce Hughes, who's there now. She's still there now. And I go back and I see her and thank her. I told her I was going to have to leave school, and that I told her I had financial problems and couldn't focus on it. So she said, before you leave, come to my office. I want to talk to you. So I did. I went to her office, and she said, have a seat. And I sat down, and she stood behind at the door, blocking the only entrance and exit. Says, I want to tell you something. I'm not moving from this door until you tell me that you're going to stick it out and stay. I will help you. I'm not going to spoon feed you, but I'm going to be here to be of support to you. And based on that, I decided to stay. And I'm glad I did, because 3 years later, she was one of the first people that I hugged. But while I was in the law school going there, I met a young man in the class in front of me. His dad was a distinguished criminal defense lawyer named Eugene Pencham. He took us, and I say us, I mean three lawyers, three law students and myself, to his house on the south side of Chicago. And we sat around, and his dad would talk to us about being a trial lawyer. So then I stayed after all the guys. Oh, and by the way, they fed us, and he told his wife, don't feed them until they learn something. So anyway, the guys and girls, it was one girl, three guys, and myself left, and I was there. And I said, I want to tell you something about me that you should know. And I told him what I had gone through. And he said to me, wow, that's something. You are a special individual. So he says, you need help and closure. He says, but let me make a suggestion to you. He says, I know you may be thinking about prosecution. I said, well, I haven't really made up my mind. He says, well, let me say this to you. If you really want to learn the system, be a defense lawyer. He says, you will learn it very well. He said, I think you can do pretty well. So I took him up on that advice. I ended up graduating from law school, and then here comes my third child. She's 40 years old, just like the same number of years I graduated from law school. And so I found myself in a situation where I went back to the law firm, and I didn't like the corporate law. I wanted to do criminal law. So you know what happened is I left and started my own. Well, first I started working with some guys, and then I started my own practice. Didn't make a whole lot of money. The first year I netted like $5,000, but it wasn't much of it, obviously. The point of the matter is that I was practicing criminal law, and I was learning, and I was making inroads. I was doing well with juries, and understanding the system. And so Judge Pincham, by this time he had become a judge, he said to me, you should go to California for the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers seminar that takes place in July of every year. So I went to San Diego, University of San Diego, and they placed me along with some other lawyers in a section, and the guy who was a seasoned lawyer over my section was a guy, and this was his name. His name was John Cochran. Later, he would become known to me as Johnny Cochran, OJ's lawyer. So I got some really good training. So anyway, I proceeded to do well. And sometime after that, 84, my wife and I started moving in different directions, and we ended up divorcing. And so we had those 3 kids. So backing up in 91 to 93, I went to seminary and ended up getting a Master Arts in Religion that I still owe 1 paper for, but I did all of the classwork. So anyway, I became a minister as well. So I find myself in the situation going back to 84, where I would find out then about my name situation. Well, remember the lady I told you who I met, and I asked her to be my mother when I was 14, and she said she'll be my friend. And if I didn't tell you, I'm telling you now. Anyway, she stayed in my life all those years. And so then I told her, I said, I discovered that I've been living under a name that I can't even get a birth certificate for. Even though my license and everything was under Wright, I was known as Richard Collins. And on the birth certificate was the man who I didn't get along with, who had created a lot of problems when I was living with my aunt, and who blocked me going to college. Anyway, the bottom line is, and he assaulted my sisters. But anyway, she had passed away, my aunt. So I called him and asked him, I said, what is this document? What happened? And he hung up on me, or cussed me out, and then hung up. So I ended up turning to the person, Mary D., who was my friend, and I told her what was going on. She says, well, what can you do? And I said, well, I can go and I can change my name, but a birth certificate will still show him as my father and my aunt as my mother, which I didn't want at all. I really didn't want him as my father, of course. So she said, well, what other alternative? I said, well, I ended up, I said, I lived with you for a number of years, and I do adoptions, and the law allows for you to adopt me as an adult since I've satisfied the legal requirements of having lived with you off and on to total number of 2 years, but that you have to be willing to do it. Well, I said, I'm not asking you to do it. She says, why aren't you asking me? So anyway, she agreed to do it, and we got her lawyer involved, and we went to court, and I was legally adopted, and my name went back to Richard Wright. Howard added as my natural mother's maiden name, and then I added her name to my middle name, D. So my name became Richard Howard D. Wright, and so it was taken care of. She's listed as my mom on my birth certificate. She's only 14 years older than me, but she had no problem with doing that anyway. So, and she's still alive. She's doing fine. She's actually been the commencement speaker in July of 84 for Rasmussen College at a graduation where we both spoke. But anyway, I ended up back to when I was in law school, going back to that for just a minute. The electricity, I couldn't pay the electric bill. I ended up studying by candlelight. It was something. So I made it through, obviously. And I left the law firm in 1980 to work with these other lawyers, and I didn't like them, so I started my own, and then the rest is history. I started doing radio, a show called Know Your Rights, which was spelled Wrights. My phone number was 974-4487, which spelled Wrights, Wrights. I did all of that. My practice has taken off. I ended up meeting a young lady, and we dated, and then we got married. And we ended up, her mom ended up becoming the village president or mayor of a town called Ford Heights, South Suburbs. So she asked me to be her village attorney, and I said, well, yeah, I would take the job, but I need to carry a gun because it's rough out here. She says, you can't carry a gun, only law enforcement. So I says, well, I'll go to the training and learn how to do that too. So I did. I took the classes, and I qualified, and then began working as a part-time police officer. And I would find out working in drug raids and all of that stuff, just like cops on TV that you see the show. I actually found myself never wearing a uniform, but I wore plain clothes all the time. So I found myself in a situation where the chief of police was taken down because of corruption, and so a new chief came in, and he asked me if I would be his internal affairs guy. So I agreed, and I became an investigator for that. So in the meantime, so now you see I've worn the hats of a paralegal, and I prosecuted for the village. Prosecutor, criminal defense lawyer, investigator, and a police officer. So I've worn all the hats. So I found myself in a situation where I discovered that my second wife and my former pastor, as I call him now, they got together and they did their thing. So I ended up, before that, I had another child, my fourth daughter, who's now 28, a girl. So I had nothing but girls. And so I ended up getting out of that situation and going on with my practice. And then I ended up meeting a young lady that I have now married to, been married to 24 years, almost going on 25. Next year we'll be celebrating 25 years of being married. And so anyway, I ended up finding myself in a situation where 5 years after, we got married in '94, and then the next year my first son was born, who's now 23 years old. You know his name. Yes, he's Junior. And so anyway, we ended up, I ended up finding myself where I felt like it was time for me to leave law. So I retired at 50 years old in 2000 and began teaching special education, dealing with behavioral disorder kids, running a couple of businesses that turned out okay. And so I did all of that. And things were going okay. We had our ups and we had our downs. We had our issues. So, and when I say issues, I'm talking about not with us, but financially and a lot of other things. So we ended up with more kids coming. And so to this day now I have at home 4 kids. I have a 23-year-old son, a 19-year-old daughter, an 18-year-old son. And yes, in 2008, I came up with an 8-year-old. She's an 8, well, she wasn't 8 then. Now she's 10 years old. She was born in 2008. So anyway, my life took a turn. So in 2011, someone brought to my attention that this school I had never heard of, Rasmussen College, was looking for someone to work in their business law department, to teach business law residentially in the Romeoville campus. So I applied for the job and got the job. Started teaching there October 1st, 2011, which means I just celebrated my 7th job anniversary on the 1st of October of this year, on the first day of these classes. And so anyway, I found myself in the situation that I told them that I was a criminal justice person, and they moved me into criminal justice. And then they told me that the program was turning into online. I had no idea about how to do any of that, but I was up to the task, and I said, I'm going to learn this, and so I did. So I ended up getting the job as an adjunct professor teaching. Finally, in 2014, an opening came for the state program coordinator of the School of Justice Studies for Illinois. And I applied for that position and received the position, where I had the responsibility for the criminal justice program in Illinois, which consisted of 4 campuses: Romeoville, Aurora, Mokina Tinley Park, and Rockford. And I would have the responsibility for all the students in that criminal justice program, along with teaching 3 classes. So I did that until like about a year and a half to 2 years later. They changed the roles, did away with the state program coordinator, and added 2 more classes. And thus I became a professor. I became, at that time, an associate professor. And then after that, I became assistant professor, and now, as of last year, I became professor. So Dr. Richard Wright. So anyway, I found myself in a situation where I loved the job working at the college. I met many students that I have now that have graduated and gone on and helped students. And so I've come as a professor now, one who has gone through a lot. The criminal justice system let me down. And so my contribution is to teach on a level where I produce educational, professional, and ethical criminal justice individuals. And that's why I teach the way that I do. That's why I take the time, and I'm committed to each and every one of you to help you. And so I encourage you to take advantage of me and utilize the years of experience, utilizing the story that I've shared with you, adversity. All of us are going to have things that go wrong, but it may slow you down, but it shouldn't stop you. And so I wanted to take the time to share that with you, and I am going to say good night. I hope you will listen to this entire recording. It's a little long, but it is important so you understand the context of why I am the way that I am. Again, I encourage you to pay attention to my remarks in your written assignments, in your grade books, where I include information about the discussions that relate to your assignments. I want you to make sure that you read those. Make sure that you follow the rubrics. Make sure that, above all, that you understand the course project. And so I will see you next week with our next session, which will last an hour. So with that, I'm going to say good night to each of you.